Tubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. So it's always a pleasure to be with you, but this Ekadashi is especially wonderful as it's Pandav Nirjala Ekadashi. And this Pandav and Nirjala Ekadashi has all of the potencies of all of the Ekadashis wrapped up into this one Ekadashi. And I was talking with my family, and we were kind of discussing and trying to figure out exactly what we'd be doing and how we'd be doing it. And my mom was saying, she's saying, I'm not able to fast as much like I used to. And I said, that's not the point. The point of this Ekadashi is to remember just how much Krishna's working on our side, in our favor at all times. The 5 Pandavas were some of his favorite family members, which, if we look at Krishna's genealogical family, there are so many family members. Every time you turn around, there's another favorite. There's Uddhava's favorite family member. There's Satyaki, favorite family member. You've got all of these family members. So with Krishna, I find that all of them can be his favorites. But he has the Pandavas. And with the Pandavas, he has Bhima. Bhima rightfully says one day, says, it's almost nearly impossible for me to even fast between meals. So just from like breakfast to lunch, the fasting in between makes me feel like I might die. How am I going to fast on an Ekadashi every 2 weeks? It's impossible. Can't you do something? So Krishna says, okay, no problem. If you can't fast on any of the Ekadashis, just fast on this one. In fact, I'll even name it after you. So this Ekadashi becomes known as Pandav and Nirjala Ekadashi. And so Bhima, somehow or other, gathers up all the strength to fast on this one day. So I was telling my mom, I said, do we think that the Krishna who changed the workings of the entire universe for his friend who couldn't fast will look at you who's been fasting for so many decades in Krishna consciousness and will say, oh, but you failed now. It's like, that's not our Krishna. We're into having faith in who our friend is. We're into knowing exactly who Krishna is and exactly how he'll bless us. So that's our friend. And that's the glory of this wonderful Ekadashi. That Sri Krishna, he'll make sure that he puts in a special clause just for us. A caveat just for us. Just when we think the universe works a certain way, Krishna says, no problem. I will change as much of the workings of the universe as I possibly can just for my devotee. And every single Vaishnavacharya that we come in contact with and we speak about somehow illustrates that point more and more. So today we'll be talking about 2. And as I said, this session is called Saving Radha Govinda. At one point, my mom was also saying, she's like, or my sister, she's like, that's a very interesting name for a lecture for the Bhakti Center, because they have Radha Murlidhar. But as I looked at the pastimes of Madhavendra Puri that have been popping up again and again, and they'll pop up again today, and how he was able to worship the deity of Gopinath in Remuna, even though his heart was 100% sold to his deity of Gopal. I kind of am now seeing how Radha Murlidhar can accept our service to Radha Govinda, just across the river, just not so far away from one another. So this lecture is kind of about saving all of our deities, but we'll find out how Radha Govinda needs saving and then get saved. And both of these Vaishnavacharyas that we'll be speaking about have a very close connection with the deities of Shri Shri Radha Govindaji. So this is definitely a session that is very dear to my heart already. I feel like I was kind of just waiting for it to arrive since last year. So we'll be speaking about Sri Baladev Vidyabhushan and Ganga Mata Goswamini. They both had days honoring them yesterday. As well as it being Ganga Dashera. So the day that Ganga makes her descent down to this earth planet was all yesterday. But for starters, we have Baladev Vidyabhushan and Ganga Mata Goswamini. So for Baladev Vidyabhushan, we'll start with him and we'll see how far we can get, because the tale is actually a little bit long, but I'll try and we'll fit it in to this next half an hour, which means that we get lots of drama. So there's not much known biologically about the life of Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan. Our Vaishnav historians put him as being born around 1720, so 18th century. And I can say that confidently only because I made extensive notes beforehand. So I am one of those people who, when it talks about centuries and the actual date, why is it different? You know, we have like 18th century, but it's 1700s. But I can confidently say 18th century because I wrote it in my notes. So we have Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan, and he's born in the town of Balasore, a small village in the district of Orissa near Remuna. Remuna, of course, as we already spoke about, is the town where Madhavendra Puri gave his life in service. So Madhavendra Puri starts his service in Vrindavan, establishes the deity of Gopal on top of Govardhan Hill, and then he has to go and get special sandalwood for Gopal. And then he goes and he finds Remuna and the deity of Gopinath. This deity of Gopinath steals sweet rice for him and becomes known as Kir Chor Gopinath. And it is this town of Remuna where Madhavendra Puri spends his last days. And we spoke about this even at the last session where we talked about devotees who add flavor to the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he spoke about Madhavendra Puri and him spending his days in Remuna. And so just near Remuna, Baladev is born. And from a very young age, he displays quite a wonderful aptitude for learning. He learns Sanskrit, he learns Vedic philosophies, he learns logic and grammar, he learns poetry and rhetoric, he learns how to do debates and present all kinds of arguments. And he presented a strong desire for material detachment. So he was quite spiritually attached and materially detached. He always had a longing and a yearning to go on pilgrimages. So he would go on different pilgrimages. He went to Udupi to see Udupi Krishna and the site of the line of Madhvacharya followers. And he starts picking up their philosophy. And he begins to become very good at preaching that philosophy. He takes sannyas and becomes one of the foremost preachers of this philosophy, which is like Tattvavadi philosophy, which is fancy for kind of different from what we have. One of the main differences is they believe that the jiva always completely different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. For us Gaudiya Vaishnavas, the way we can look at our main differences, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said there's achintya beda beda tattva, right? Simultaneously, one and different. Simultaneously, the same, but not. So now we have the realization that the jiva has the qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but the quantity is way off. No matter how much we would like to convince ourselves that both quality and quantity are there, the qualities are there of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but the quantity is much, much less. We are tiny drops before the ocean of the qualities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But that part is the main difference between the philosophy that Madhvacharya and those who were following him at that point were preaching, and the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Also, we have this philosophy of Dasya Bhakti, right? This servitude and devotional service. And it kind of stays there. There's not much going beyond it. So this is the philosophy that Baladev at this point begins preaching. Takes sannyas, becomes a foremost preacher, makes a big name for himself. Not that that was what he was interested in, but he makes quite a big name for himself. And then he thinks he's going to travel some more. And he thinks, oh, I'll travel to Puri. Puri was also a great seat of learning at that time. So we hear of so many different sections within India that were great, like breeding grounds for learning and logic and grammar, philosophy. Navadvip Nadia was a big seat of learning, which is how Nimai Pandit became such a renowned name. Right? So we have Nimai Pandit in Nadia, but in Puri there is Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, which will need a whole session just to speak about him. He is quite pivotal in the pastimes of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He was quite a Vedantist, but a little bit of an impersonalist. He would speak about Srimad Bhagavatam, but not about devotional service. He comes in contact with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He begins to express his version of Vedanta philosophy, which he has worked his whole life on, and he's quite old at this time. It's like in his 60s, kind of, right? So he's at a later stage in life, and he's worked his whole life on these theories. So it's like when you see all of the academics and these PhD scholars, and they've worked their lives on their theses and their dissertations and their published works. So this is the kind of work that we're speaking about, but now in terms of Vedanta and Vedic philosophy. So he's worked his whole life on these theories. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu hears them and he says, he's quiet actually, for several days, 7. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya says, oh young Brahmin, oh young sannyasi, tell me, do you understand everything that you're hearing? I've been expounding on the philosophies of Vedanta Sutra for days, and you've just been quiet, not saying anything. Have you heard? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, I've heard. The problem is you've got it all wrong. Now try telling somebody who's spent decades of their life, dedicated decades of their life to this Vedanta philosophy, and you tell them after 7 days, and Mahaprabhu at this point is in his 20s. He's a young kid. That's how it's always seen when the older generation sees you. It's like, you're a baby. When do you ever stop becoming a baby? The answer is never. There's always someone older than you to say, you're a baby. So Mahaprabhu's in his 20s, and now he's telling this older philosopher, you've got it all wrong. Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya is furious. He doesn't know what to do with himself. He has debates and arguments. He says, you impudent, insolent Brahmin, brahmachari sannyasi. What could you possibly know about Vedanta? He's so upset, but then he's visited in a dream by the goddess of learning herself. And she says, I can't even show my face before my master because of the way you've spoken to him. You go and take shelter from him right now. So he has no choice but to go and take shelter of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And then this same Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya begins to compose verse after verse after verse in glorification of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, 100 in fact. He begins to use all of this erudite scholarship and all of this learning in the service of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So this was what was established in Puri. All of this learning. And Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya has his own school, right? All of his line of thinkers and philosophers. And that line is still going on there, even though Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya is gone at this point. As we're talking centuries before, right? Mahaprabhu was in the 1400s. Now we're with Baladev Vidyabhushan in the 1700s. So we've got centuries between them. But Baladev Vidyabhushan says the line of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya is still there. And these Gaudiya Vaishnavas are still there. He says, let me go and preach to them. And he actually goes with the intent of defeating them in a debate. This was like the thing, you go and you engage in debate with the intent to defeat someone else philosophically. And then that's like your badge of honor, which is like having like amazing rap battles between philosophers everywhere you go and proclaiming yourself the winner. And everybody else proclaims you the winner as well. So Baladev Vidyabhushan goes, and there's a very, very humble devotee, Gaudiya Vaishnav, by the name of Radha Damodar Prabhu. And Radha Damodar Prabhu is in the line of Rupa Goswami, as we all are. And when he meets Baladev, he just calmly, very humbly, he knew everything, Radha Damodar Prabhu, but he'd never ever tell anyone. You'd never know it. He wouldn't speak more than necessary. Just humble in the background. And when he meets Baladev, he thoroughly defeats him with his ideas and theories on devotional service. It doesn't even have to be an argument now. His conviction is enough. Baladev hears this Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy and he is sold. Now he feels these stirrings in his heart. There is something more. There's more. There's more not only to this Vedanta Sutra, but there's more to me as a soul. Because as souls, what does this actually mean for us to be qualitatively non-different from Krishna, even though quantity is lacking for us? The qualities are there, which means that, not in a proud way, but we can invoke those qualities in order to further our devotional service. Krishna is always happy to extend those qualities. We see that pure devotees can display, and not that they even mean to, but in the course of performing their devotional service, they display mystical abilities. They have renunciation, they have strength, they have knowledge, they have power, beauty, opulence. All 6 opulences they can manifest, but for the cause of devotional service. So now his whole world is changed. Baladev is sold on Gaudiya Vaishnavism. He takes initiation from Radha Damodar Prabhu, learns from him for a long time, and then finally, Radha Damodar Prabhu says, you should go to Vrindavan. Baladev goes to Vrindavan and begins learning under another Vaishnav who is so integral for us as Gaudiya Vaishnavas. He learns from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who is one of my favorite acharyas. He'll have his own day soon. He's one of my favorite acharyas. His commentaries on Srimad Bhagavatam are astounding, unparalleled. We have so much information because of the commentaries of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Srila Prabhupada pulled from his commentaries again and again and again. And it is for this reason that we have most of 10th canto, 11th canto, 12th canto. We have all of these because of the commentaries of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. After Srila Prabhupada left, and it was the job of the disciples of Srila Prabhupada to try and establish the rest of Srimad Bhagavatam in his absence, we have Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. This is who becomes the guiding light and the teacher of Baladev. So he's learning from him. Everything is going well. And then there's a controversy. In Jaipur, the deity of Govindaji has been established. Govindaji was once in Vrindavan, but because of invading forces from the Muslim invaders, they moved him, especially because of Aurangzeb, they moved him to Jaipur and establish him as king of the big city. And he has a Radharani who's also installed near him. And so they're worshipped together. Now, because Govindaji was first established in Vrindavan by the Gaudiya Vaishnavas who have come from Bengal, these Bengali Gaudiya Vaishnav pujaris have also traveled with Govindaji. So now they are still worshipping Radha Govindaji. So much so that the king, Sadachari Raj, the king of Jaipur at the time, was such a fan of Govindaji and such a fan of the worship of Govindaji that he pretty much gave precedence to the Vaishnavas. He let the Vaishnavas do whatever they needed to do, gave them free reign for worship. He had secretly himself taken initiation. He was a huge fan. So he was totally in with the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. At that time in Jaipur, there was also a big sect of the Sri Sampradaya, the followers of Ramanujacharya, who we also revere as a great Acharya. And these are called Ramanandis. These followers, these Ramanandis, had a big problem. All of the respect, everything was being given to these Bengali Gaudiya Vaishnavas. They're thinking we are, South Indian Brahmins, and they are very strict about everything, about deity worship, about pronunciation, about Vedanta Sutra. They are so strict about everything. So they begin to present an argument. Finally, they go before the king of Jaipur and they say, we think that you should hand over the worship of Govindaji to the Sri Sampradaya. It should not be in the hands of the Bengali Gaudiya Vaishnavas. Now, of course, they can't just make this claim without reason. So they begin to give reasons. They say, one, who even knows if they're a real Sampradaya? What is their lineage? Where do they come from? Which lineage are they a part of? Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya? Like, who do they follow? Which line are they coming in? So all of the Sampradayas must be able to trace their lineage somehow back to Sri Krishna. They say, we can do this, but can they? Have they? Furthermore, in order to be a formally established Sampradaya and spiritual path and tradition at that time, you needed to have a formal commentary on Vedanta Sutra. So it's like, in order to be a true academic, you need to have your thesis and your dissertation and be published, right? But this is what you need, this Vedanta Sutra commentary, to be formally acknowledged. I said, where is it? Now, Mahaprabhu had given so many teachings, but as we know, he hadn't written anything down except Shikshastakam. So while Mahaprabhu had pulled from so many of the teachings of all of the Sampradayas, and he had melded them to form this Gaudiya Vaishnav Sampradaya teaching and this tradition, it was all oral. He had not given a Vedanta Sutra commentary written. He'd spoken, given teachings and so many lectures, but nothing written. So they refused to accept it. And they said, these two are problems. We don't know where they come from or in what line. And they don't have the credentials, the Vedanta Sutra credentials, to make them a formally acknowledged Sampradaya, a spiritual tradition. Furthermore, they objected to the worship of Radha Krishna together. They said, how is this possible? Nowhere is it stated in Shastra that Radha Krishna are together. Nowhere is it stated that they're even married. So how can you put her on the altar next to him? We say you have to remove it immediately. They were in the line of worship in awe and reverence. And this Braj Bhakti did not sit well with them. And they said, actually, nowhere in Shastra is Radharani's name even mentioned. So how can she be worshipped next to Govindaji? They called for a massive change, a complete overhaul of everything that had been done within the temple of Radha Govindaji. And the king was somehow compelled to remove the deity of Radharani. So he removes her from the side of Govindaji, which Every time I think of it, my heart breaks just a little. And he suspended the worship of Govindaji by the Bengali Gaudiya Vaishnavas. So he was compelled to take away their seva, and he moved the embodiment of all bhakti. What the king also did was he sent an open letter to Vrindavan, to the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, which said, in essence, help, in big bold letters. Someone has to do something because this is deeply disturbing. So he was disturbed, but he was compelled to do it as the king. He had to somehow keep in mind everyone. So when word gets to Vrindavan, it gets to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who is incredibly disturbed. And he wants nothing more than to go and make sure that all of these claims are refuted and that this service is reestablished properly. But he's old. He says, I can't make this trip, this journey, and to go and engage in all of these debates and arguments. That phase of my life is past. So who does he send? He sends Baladev. Baladev goes to Jaipur and he meets with all of these Sri Sampradaya Vaishnavas. Now, this is amazing. They're Vaishnavas. But it's like Vaishnavas attacking Vaishnavas. So we should not be so surprised when spiritual politics come up today. When we have all of these kinds of spiritual divides and we think, oh, what kind of Krishna would let this happen? It's been happening. Sometimes far worse than we even see right now. So some of it is a symptom of Kali Yuga, this age of quarrel and hypocrisy, but some of it is the divine pastimes of the Lord so that he can work out things in quite mysterious and courageous and heroic ways. So let's see what happens. There are Vaishnavas fighting Vaishnavas with arguments and debates, taking away their service, taking away the worship of Srimati Radharani next to Govindaji. Baladev arrives on the scene. And in fact, he even brings up the argument. He says, how can anyone say that, who do we follow? How can we trace our line back to Krishna? We follow Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He's Krishna himself. Bas. So easy. Like we have a direct line. They refuse to accept that. He said, but we have Srimad Bhagavatam itself. We don't need a commentary on Vedanta Sutra. Srimad Bhagavatam is already there. Commentary, topic, spotless Purana, everything. I said, listen, you can't say, because we also follow Srimad Bhagavatam, you can't just say Bhagavatam is there and then you do nothing else. These are the rules and regulations. These are the credentials. This is the path that you follow. Step 1, you trace your lineage. Step 2, you make your Vedanta Sutra commentary. So we cannot accept anything you're saying without this commentary. It needs to be there and it needs to be written down. And you cannot simply fall back on Srimad Bhagavatam and say you don't need to do anything else. We have all of these commentators who have done this. You have to follow tradition. Baladev says, okay, give me some days. Give me a few days. A few days? This is preposterous. This commentary on Vedanta Sutra is usually a life's work. A lifetime's work of decades. What do you mean give you a few days? It's impossible. He says, give me a few days. They gave him 18 days to come up with a commentary on Vedanta Sutra, which usually takes people decades, in order to save the worship of Shri Shri Radha Govindaji and his entire Sampradaya. No pressure. So, what does Baladev do? After he speaks to those Ramanandis, immediately he goes to the temple of Govindaji. And he falls flat in front of the deity of Govindadev, and he tells him everything. Everything, out loud. Start to finish. He relates the entire story. This is what they're saying. This is what they've done, which you would think if they removed the deity of Radharani from Govindaji, Govindaji would already know what they did. He was there. He's been a victim. But Baladev tells him everything. And now I have to write this commentary. What do I do? He lays out the entire plight at the lotus feet of Govinda Dev. And I love this part because it's so hopeful for us. Sometimes we hear, oh, pure devotees, they never pray for anything. They never ask for anything. They don't bother God. They just do their things and they suck it up and they go on with life and they just somehow keep on going and they put one foot in front of the other and they never freak out and they never get into anxiety. And Baladev is showing the complete opposite. He was in complete anxiety. He freaked out. He didn't know how he was going to do it. They gave him 18 days. He said, now I have 18 days, but I have no idea how I'm supposed to back up what I said I would do. He runs to Govinda Dev. This is what I love about being able to follow in the footsteps of the great acharyas. We can't always copy, but we can follow in the footsteps. These are the footsteps that we need to follow in. If we have a problem, we should run and lay it at the feet of Govinda Dev. Out loud, tell him everything. Srila Prabhupada makes a point so many times in conversations that the more that we show that dependence on Krishna, the more Krishna loves to reciprocate. Srila Prabhupada said in a room conversation, Krishna takes the prayers of the devotee very seriously. So we should pray. Not for frivolous things, but for the things that really mean that much, we should pray. The residents of Vrindavan were not sitting thinking, oh, we'll never ask Krishna for anything. Anytime they got into trouble, they were asking Krishna, mostly because he got them into trouble. Please refer back to Govardhan Hill incident. And Krishna says, no problem. Don't worship Indra. He pours water on the ocean as well as the land, and the ocean doesn't give him sacrifices. Don't worry. Listen, worship Govardhan Hill. I got you, no problem. When the pillars of rain start falling, who do they run to first? Well, Krishna, this is your fault. You told us not to worship Indra. Now Indra's angry like we said he would be. He's trying to physically destroy us and wipe us off the map, literally. And now what do? Krishna, you help us. Cowherd boys, every time they got in trouble, first thing they did, oh, Krishna, we're your very own people. You can't let us get burned in a blazing fire or killed by a murderous crane bird or taken over by demons or killed by the poisonous waters in the Kaliya lake. Every day they had a problem. But they didn't say, you know what? Let's not bother him. In fact, when they looked in the mouth of Aghasura, and some cowherd boys wisely said, I don't think we should do this. This looks like a murderous snake intent on killing us all. They said, but look, Krishna's right there. He'll save us like he does every day. There's a popular hashtag on social media, which is, but did you die? For the cowherd boys, several days, the answer was yes. They died. Krishna luckily brought them back to life because he knew he'd get in trouble, but they died. But they asked for help before they died. But they asked for help. Baladev runs and asks for help. We should ask for help. We should understand that all the things in life are much bigger than us, way bigger than we can handle. This is part of surrender. So Baladev asks for help, and that night he is visited in a dream by none other than Sri Govinda Dev himself. And Sri Govinda Dev says, I've heard everything that you've told me. You start writing. Start writing, and I will personally dictate to you what to write. I will make sure that you have an entire commentary on Vedanta Sutra even before the time is done. And if you're worried that anybody will present an argument or find a flaw, no one will be able to find a flaw in your commentary because it will be personally composed and compiled by me. You just start writing. I'll take care of the rest. This is Krishna. Why wouldn't we want to ask for help from somebody like that? Who has the power to say, okay, you just do what you have to do. I'll take care of the rest. Baladev wakes up. He is enthused and enlivened by this dream. Rightfully so, he begins writing as fast as he can. Krishna dictates, Baladev writes, and he writes, and he writes, and he finishes it even within a shorter amount of few days than 18. When he presents it in a grand presentation to those Brahmins of the Sri Sampradaya, they are flawed. They are floored. Of course, they can't find any flaws in his arguments or in his Vedanta Sutra commentary. 15:15 of Bhagavad Gita is one of my family's favorite verses, where Shri Krishna says, I am seated within everyone's heart, and from me comes all remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. Of all the Vedas, I am to be known. I am the compiler of the Vedanta and the knower of the Vedas. This is the same Govinda who has now compiled an entire Vedanta Sutra. These Brahmins are so enlivened. They're so enthused by this commentary that they now are asking, they're like, okay, well, tell us more. Give us the answers to all of our other doubts, which now they don't even have doubts anymore, but they just want to hear it. Because for one who begins to speak these pastimes and glories of Shri Krishna, it's like he shows up. His effulgence is there. And all of those wonderful qualities of Krishna begin to show up in the presence of that devotee. So now these devotees are charismatic. They're charming. They're beautiful and wondrous. This is what happens because we wind up being in the association of Krishna. There's no way that effulgence doesn't rub off on us. So Baladev now, they don't have any more arguments, but they just want to hear it because it's so attractive. So Baladev begins to tell them all the reasons why they should not have suspended the worship of Srimati Radhika. He says, in fact, of course she's mentioned in Sastra. And he brings up a verse from the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And this verse from the 10th canto, chapter 30, text 28, says, certainly this particular gopi has perfectly worshipped the all-powerful personality of Godhead, Govinda, since he was so pleased with her that he abandoned the rest of us and brought her to a secluded place. Now, of course, the gopis are speaking to one another in the midst of the rasa dance where they've been left unceremoniously by Govinda. But the word used is anyaradito. In the purport, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains that the word araditaha refers to Srimati Radharani. He comments, the sage Shukadev Goswami has tried with all endeavor to keep her name hidden, but now it automatically shines forth from the moon of his mouth. That he has spoken her name is indeed her mercy, and thus the word araditaha is like the rumbling of a kettle drum sounded to announce her great good fortune. Not only is this verse beautifully extolling the glories of Srimati Radhika, even in a hidden way, but it's also extolling the glories of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the guru of Baladev. So he speaks that verse. He says, so Radharani is there? How can you say she's not there? How can you say that Radha Krishna, since they're not married formally, according to your standards, that they shouldn't be worshipped in the same room? Because that's what they said. They can be worshipped in separate rooms, but not together on the same altar. What kind of propriety is this? He said, how can you say they're not married? Of course they're married. They are one soul in two transcendental bodies. They're never even separated from one another. Their potency and their power cannot be distinguished from one another. They're forever intertwined. But if you need proof, he cites one pastime, which is one of my favorite pastimes, because it's really sweet. And I think growing up as a Vaishnav kid, you always kind of wonder what's happening with Radha Krishna. She loved him and then he left. And then and then he marries a whole bunch of people, but her name is never really formally listed. Like, what's happening? So he cites one pastime. Once Brahma comes and steals all the boys and calves. Krishna looks for all his friends I don't think he looked very extensively, but this is more a quality of being a boy. I have nephews, and whenever you ask them to look for something, they look around. They say, I can't find it. Sometimes I wonder, did he look that long? But he looked for them and he couldn't find them. And so he thinks, I can't go back home without them. But the perks of being the Supreme Personality of Godhead are, when you can't go back home without all of your friends and the animals that you were given charge of, which number in the millions, he can expand himself as every single one of them. Problem solved. Home before nightfall. So he expands himself as all of the gopas and all of the calves. It is during this year, he maintains this disguise for a year. And every home, every barn, every goshala has Krishna as at their heart, as their son, as their worshipable, dearmost family member. He fulfills the desires of every single mother in Vrindavan. So it is during this time that Garga Muni, the great Acharya who was present at the name-giving ceremony of Krishna, he gives all of them great advice. He's given them advice on loads of things, including Ekadashi fasts and others. Garga Muni arrives during this year and he tells all of the gopas, he says, oh, elderly cowherd men, your daughters who have all come of marriageable age, now it would be a really good time to look for matches for them. They think, you're right. This is actually a perfect idea. You've said correctly. So now they match up all of their young gopis with all of the young gopas. And then they get them married, Radharani included. And now all of the gopis marry none other than Krishna because all of the gopas were missing. Baladev says, so how can you say they're not married? They were married right then. And they're always together. The Sri Sampradaya happily accepts all of his arguments. These Ramanandis accept his arguments so much. They loved them all so much that they immediately said, please accept us all as your disciples. Can we reinitiate? Can we take reinitiation from you right now, please? Thinking as a person, it would be very difficult for me to stay humble in a situation like that. You've done this whole big thing. You've written a commentary. You've gone on a marathon of writing academic Vedic sutras and commentaries and literatures that will be around for the end of time. You've given all of these extensive arguments, and now all of these people are not only singing your praises, but they're saying, we'll take initiation from me right this moment. Baladev says, no. Humbly, he says, no. You were already Vaishnavs. You were already in a bona fide Sampradaya, and if I reinitiate you, that would be a show of disrespect to the Sri Sampradaya. It has a bona fide spiritual lineage, and it has Bhakti Yoga. In the line of in Dasya, you have servitorship in Bhakti Yoga. Don't give that up, and don't make me commit an offense towards the entire Sri Sampradaya. He refuses. This is also really a big lesson for me, because the humility that is constantly shown by all of our Vaishnavacharyas at every single point in one of these lectures, there comes a point where they show extreme humility. Even the last class, even though it was Ramachandra Puri, it was Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu who showed this huge amount of humility. This Trinadapi Sunichena that Mahaprabhu spoke about, he really walked the talk. He didn't just preach it and say everybody else should do this, but I'm the Supreme Personality of Godhead, so I don't have to follow those rules. He did what he told everyone else to do, and even to the extreme. Baladev is given the title Vidya Bhushan, one who has knowledge as his most divine ornament. And he decides, he's like, he's just gonna keep his quiet life. He winds up writing so many philosophical books and expounding on Vedic literature, but he doesn't even talk about himself so much. So we don't even have biological information because he doesn't talk about himself that much. This is the humility of the great Vaishnavacharyas. He reestablishes the worship of Govindaji. They bring back Radharani in a grand ceremony. The king asserts the service back to the Bengali Gaudiya Vaishnavas, and everybody is happy with it. The king says that the arti of Govindaji will be the first performed. Of all the temples of Vrindavan, Govindaji's arti should be performed first, which is wonderful in honoring him, but it also means God has to wake up a little bit earlier there than the rest of the temples. So he has his arti first in a great show of honor. And all of the devotees are incredibly happy. He's brought all of this happiness back. He goes back to Vrindavan and presents all of this to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who is so, so happy with him. And he writes an addendum to his commentary, which he names the Govinda Bhashya. This commentary, he puts it right on there. It's not mine. This is Govinda's. So he names it the Govinda Bhashya. And in fact, Srila Prabhupada dedicates his Bhagavad Gita to Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan, who so nicely presented his commentary called the Govinda Bhashya. So we owe such a great debt of gratitude to Baladev Vidyabhushan for saving our Sampradaya and saving Radha Govindaji, really bringing their worship back, because had they stayed separated, what could we have done? I can't even wrap my mind around it. So he writes an addendum to his Govinda Bhashya. One verse. And it says, "May Sri Govinda be all glorious. By his mercy, he revealed this commentary to me in a dream. The commentary revealed by him is especially appreciated by the highly learned. And as a result of this, I have been given the name Vidyabhushan. But it is Sri Govinda who deserves all credit. May that Sri Govinda, who is the most dear life and soul of Sri Radhika, be all victorious." I can't think of a better dedication than that. Kind of want to take that dedication and put it on anything that I will ever do in my life from this point on. Birthday parties, invitations for anything, just that dedication should be there. May Govinda be all victorious. This is the humility. One would think that he's like, I put in work for 18 days, less. Look at all that I did. Wasn't me. He's happy to give all credit to Govinda. And in fact, he worships his own deity, who he names Radha Vijay Govinda. Sweet deities. And he worships them along with the deities of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, who are Radha Gokulananda. And they're worshipped not far from the temple of Radharaman in Vrindavan. And the fact that he names his deity Radha Vijay Govinda, this Govinda who will always be victorious. I heard that last year and I started referring to Govinda in my heart as Vijay Govinda. Just trying to, remind him that he is ever victorious and that he can make my life ever victorious, no matter what problems are faced, I have to know who to go to. It's important for us to know who to address. This is why Krishna has unlimited names. That second verse of Shikshastakam says, you have unlimited names and you've invested all of your potency into these names. So, O Vijay Govinda, O most victorious Lord of my life, you can do anything. So why are we facing these troubles? Sometimes we have to remind the Lord, we are your people, but we are also frail human people. That at any moment we could lose our lives in the course of these trials and tribulations. Please help us. So this is Baladev Vidyabhushan. He accepts a few disciples and he is so committed to the worship of Govinda Dev that later on he becomes known as Sri Govinda Das. There's not a better name. Short, sweet, simple. Sri Govinda Das. And he's forever credited with saving Radha Govinda. The second, which we can speak about really briefly, but we have to, is Gangamata Goswamini. Now, you know, what? The two, doesn't it seem like a little bit? But Gangamata Goswamini was not originally a Swamini. She was a princess of Bengal, and her name was Shachi Devi. And she was a princess who actually, one, she refused to marry because she was so attached to Krishna. And then when her parents passed away, she ruled the kingdom for some time because there was no one else left to rule. So she ruled, even though she had no real attachment to it. She was always engaged in thinking about Krishna. And particularly, she was attached to the worship of Govinda ji, common thread. That same Govinda ji in Jaipur, she was so attached to him. She was a disciple of Haridas Pandit, not our Namacharya, but a different Haridas Pandit, who was a very famous Pandit at the time within Vrindavan. And he would often tease her because she was very given to bouts of renunciation. Sometimes she wouldn't eat, sometimes she wouldn't sleep, sometimes she would just wear rags, but she's royalty. And so sometimes he would tease her. Oh, you can't keep those fasts. What do you even like? And she would take it as a personal challenge. And then she would fast even more. And so sometimes they'd say that she was looking like undernourished and very skinny, but she would just fast. She would give discourses on Srimad Bhagavatam. And she would tell the pastimes of Krishna. And people loved it. Of course, when I was researching, I was praying to her constantly. Like, woman after my own heart, or actually I'm after her own heart. Like, if I could just. But she would give discourses on Srimad Bhagavatam and the pastimes of Krishna, and people loved it. And so she gained a following, which she also did not want. And so how is it that she could have had the name Gangamata Goswamini? Because her name was Shachi Devi. And an interesting, very short story is that once on Ganga Dashera, the advent of the appearance of Ganga Devi, which was yesterday, she had a yearning to bathe in the Ganga. But she was unable to. She goes to sleep where she is. The Ganga overflows its banks, does whatever it does, makes its own course to her ashram, goes into her ashram, is able to, like, it's like a pleasant flood. Not even like a harmful flood, but a pleasant flood, pleasant enough that this current of the Ganga now picks her up from where she is in her ashram, carries her along her current, and then drops her off at the feet of Lord Jagannath, her Lord. And so she's given the name Gangamata Goswamini in honor of this pastime where the Ganga, it concedes to her will, her devotion, her yearning just to honor Ganga Devi and to take a dip in her waters. Not only can you take a dip, but I will carry you to the feet of our very own Lord. So Gangamata Goswamini, we hear very often about her when we hear about famous lady gurus, right? We normally hear about like two: Janava Mata, the wife of Lord Nityananda, and Gangamata Goswamini. There were others, but usually those are the two big ones that everybody like let's talk about them. But she was very, very well known for her love for Govindaji. I totally get it. Such sweet deity. Any of the deities of Govinda, every time I see them, I think, so sweet. He is one who gives pleasure to the senses. How can we go wrong? It's foolproof. So she was very well known for her devotion to Govindaji and very well known for her discourses of Srimad Bhagavatam. And like I said, when we speak these glories, and Srimad Bhagavatam even says, even the listener, even those who listen, they come in contact with such good fortune, such opulence, such all of the 6 opulences that Krishna has in full. Somehow, they start to appear within the bodies of not just the speaker, but also the listener, of those who indulge and engage in hearing and reciting the pastimes of Shri Krishna and his devotees. So thank you so much for allowing me to steal a little bit of my Govinda's effulgence. I hope and pray that whatever mistakes will be overlooked by all of our kind devotional Vaishnav friends. Thank you. And I hope and pray that I've somehow just said one thing that might have made him happy. It might have done justice to all of our Vaishnavacharyas. Thank you so much. Vaishnav Thakur ki jai, Ekadashi Titi ki jai.
Thank you so much, Mother Acyuta, for this wonderful narration, especially so touched by the details that you shared on Baldev Vidyabhushanji and Ganga Mata Goswami. I request devotees, if they have any comments or questions, please feel free to unmute yourself. I specifically was very touched by when you were narrating about Baldev Vidyabhushan, how he was praying, that you said like he went and prayed to Govinda, that how we open up of whatever problems we have to the Lord. So it was very helpful. I really thank you for that point. I'll be carrying it with me, trying to follow. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone on this auspicious Ekadashi day.
Oh,
yeah,
wait.
here Ardhiras is there.
Hare Krishna, everybody. Thank you again for organizing this this talk, and thank you, Acyuta Gopi, for being here with us. I have a couple of questions, but I'll just ask one to begin with. So my question is: we know on the one hand that Krishna is the supreme controller, but on the other hand, we know that we have limited independence, and you were mentioning that. In this pastime, we see the Sri Vaishnavas who are Vaishnavas and who we greatly respect, but we see that it seemed that they were somehow against, the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. And then you were mentioning that, but Krishna had a plan, for the whole pastime. So my question is, when things like that happen, do we see it as like it's all Krishna's arrangement? Because, for instance, he might have just wanted he wanted that commentary written, like Govinda Bhasha. Was it like all Krishna's arrangement, or, do devotees have their independence and they might do things that maybe don't seem that ideal, but then Krishna uses the situation to still allow great things to happen? So I don't know if you can answer that question, but I'm wondering.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I think unless it changes the outcome, I like to always think that Krishna is going to make great things happen. I kind of take that side of things with him, and whenever I am praying in the depths of my heart with Krishna, I am sometimes looking around like, what is happening? You make great things happen, and this is not looking so great right now. So I'm going to need you to fix it immediately. Quicker than quick, because I don't know how much longer. And even though Krishna might have had a plan, it didn't mean that Baladev Vidyabhushan and Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, they didn't just sit and say, well, they're Vaishnavas, we should just let it happen. So I think that that's actually a really important point that I actually really liked, because sometimes you think, well, they were Vaishnavas, we're Vaishnavas, who's right, who's wrong, and instead of getting caught up in that, they kind of just took the approach that, but Krishna must be worshipped with Sri Radha. That's going to make him the happiest. And they had their seniors who were totally in line with them in that regard. And so I think it made it easier to know what was the right path and how was Krishna going to work out things. But Baladev Vidyabhushan didn't know how things were going to work out. He said, give me a few days. He had no plan, which is why he went to Govinda Dev in anxiety. He did not have a plan for how to work out a Vedanta Sutra commentary in 18 days. He said, okay, fine, we'll give you 18 days. And then he freaked out so much so that he went to Govinda. He said, you have to do something. So I think there's a tremendous amount of faith that the devotees put in Sri Krishna, and they have to. because you don't ever really know that Krishna has a great plan until after the plan is executed, right? It's not like you know beforehand, you're like, I know Krishna's going to come to me in a dream. It's all going to be fine. For the course and for the case of this pastime, as he exemplifies the mood of a devotee, of course, pure devotees, we feel like they have this extra knowledge, right? This extra spiritual sense given to them. But for the purposes of this pastime, he is very much taking on a role of human anxiety. And he did not go into it knowing that this is how Krishna is going to work it out until after he already worked it out. So I think that comes with knowing who our friend is. You know, it's like I've often said, sometimes I get really, really sad when I lose friends due to misunderstandings, because it feels like they should have known me enough to give me the benefit of the doubt to know I wouldn't have said or did whatever they thought I did, or I didn't mean it the way that they took it. They should have known that who I am and the way I give myself to the people that I love, it should have been different. But I kind of realized that that's what I do with Krishna. Have I been giving him the benefit of the doubt that, Krishna, I know you well enough that you are not going to put me in a situation where I'm going to just flounder and fail. At no time does Krishna put his devotees in a situation where they fail or they flounder or any of that. And even when it looks like a Vaishnav or a great spiritual person has given up their lives, they already signed up for that beforehand. So even if we look at Jesus, right, you know, it's like, yeah, but his path was kind of rough and then he died. But he had signed up for that beforehand. He already had given that. He knew, I am willing to shed all of this spiritual, metaphorical, literal blood for all of these followers. I'm willing to do that for the path of my spirituality. I have that much faith. Like that's what he signed up for. And when I see great Vaishnavas and they come to the end of their lives, even if it's through some cancer or some external thing, we look and we say, how could Krishna put his devotees in that kind of suffering? What great plan is this? What is this? But when you listen to them speak about it, they don't flounder. It's the most brave, courageous discourse I've ever heard in my life. They always are so assured of where they're going. They are so sure of their Krishna that is not what they're worried about. So that gives me hope that Krishna never puts us in a situation where we are failing and floundering if we can extend that faith to know who our friend is. If we can really have faith, like past that moment where Rukmini was crying and she was upset because she didn't know that was going to be a great thing that he was going to turn out to do until now also, which incidentally, fun fact, today in Puri is the day that they celebrate the marriage of Krishna and Rukmini. And today is the day that they celebrate the marriage where they celebrate it with Jagannath and Rukmini. They say, oh, he's going to go and he's going to go kidnap a princess, and they have a whole big ceremony and a festival. But she, in the course of this pastime, was not displaying, I know everything's going to be fine. Krishna has a way and a will. She also was displaying a mood of what is going to happen. So we do know that Krishna makes it great, but we usually don't know that until after he's made it great. And then we think, oh, well, that worked out. Okay. But it's natural. And what I love is that it's natural to feel that trepidation, that hesitation, like, but is this going to work out? Sometimes it's natural to shed those tears and anxiety. It's happened. And so we shouldn't feel like less of devotees, or we shouldn't feel less of ourselves when the anxiety comes. Even if we are looking and saying, well, this Vaishnava is saying this, and this Vaishnava is saying that, and this feels right to me, but this is also a Vaishnava. How do I reconcile the two? We go and we lay it all out to Govinda. We say, you have to do something. You have to help me make it great, because I can't do it on my own. And then we have to have faith that our friend is going to make it great. even if we shed a few tears in the process. That's natural. It's like when it's winter, we're going to shiver, and that's kind of natural. We can't say like, I was supposed to be detached from heat and cold, this body, oh God, but we can understand that the shivering is natural. So sometimes the anxiety is going to be natural, but we also can extend that faith and know that Krishna is going to make it great. Yes, please ask one more question.
Hare Krishna. So, I'll just ask one more question. So you were mentioning that it is kind of related to what you just shared. You were mentioning that we shouldn't feel that we shouldn't pray to Krishna, because sometimes you have this idea that pure devotees don't ask anything. But then you said we shouldn't ask for things that are frivolous. So now my question is, sometimes we might have a desire, which from our point of view seems like it is devotional, like, I would like to, do that deity service. I would like to, I don't know, go there and do that service. But how do we know that's also not maybe frivolous, in the sense of we might also just want to do it for, because we want to be seen, or we want to be with certain people in a certain way. So how can we distinguish between like the frivolous and the non-frivolous desires? And is there any place to ask Krishna for things, even if we know maybe my intentions aren't this pure, but I still want it?
So the more frivolous is easier to tackle, right? So the more frivolous is what we think of, like, material things, cars, jobs, homes, mansions, all those, jewelry, clothes. And 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, there's certain purport, but Srila Prabhupada says, if you have any desires, you had better go to Krishna for it. So the short and sweet answer is still just go to Krishna, because that dependence is Krishna's. He loves it. It's what he's hungry for. He even says, Draupadi prayed to me. She called out to me in fear and in distress. But every time I think of it, I become more obliged to her. I become more in her debt, thinking about how she called out to me. Normally it would be she would be in his debt because she needed help. But no, he says, her depending on me, I'm more and more in her debt, even every time I think about it. So that's what Krishna is hungry for. So it's a little bit easier to tackle, like the idea of the materially frivolous things, right? All those things. If you have any desires, really, you'd better go to Krishna for them rather than anyone else anyway. Srila Prabhupada makes that point very clear. The other thing is, I tend not to look at seva as a frivolous request. I try to look at seva as, where does it come from? Nectar Devotion says that any impetus for devotional service that even arises within the heart is a manifestation of Lord Balaram. So as Lord Balaram is the paraphernalia of Sri Krishna, and he'll manifest as all of Vrindavan, he'll manifest as shoes, a bed, an umbrella, a canopy, a chamara, whatever he needs. He also manifests as the desire for devotional service in the heart of the devotee. So this is a direct manifestation of Lord Baladev. So I can't really call those desires frivolous if that's a direct manifestation of Lord Baladev. Now, when our egos get into it, it gets a little bit more difficult to sort out, doesn't it? A simple answer is we don't have to sort it out. Krishna will do that for us. Case in point, whenever I'm in a kirtan and I start thinking to myself, I'm doing a great job. Do you see all these devotees that I've gotten to chant back and roar the holy name at the top of their lungs? This is amazing that I'm able to orchestrate this like this. It's usually at that point that the kirtan falls apart. Every time without fail. Speakers will cut off, mics will cut off, mics will feedback. My voice will completely crack and die. All kinds of things happen. It's happened time and time again. So the desire for devotional service is there. But what does Balaram do? He also plows the heart and makes it a fit place for Krishna to reside. So he knows how to sort out all of the egotistical ideas and conceptions that we have for ourselves. Because the minute we start thinking, look at how great I'm doing, Lord Balaram says, oh, okay, watch. And as Adi Guru, he has a way of rooting out with that plow, And it's never comfortable, but he has a way of rooting it out so that we remember who's really in charge. That, oh, wait, this is Nam Prabhu. This is not me. This is only Nam Prabhu and Govinda. And I had better remember it if I want to keep my voice. One of my kirtan gurus, and he was also like my kitchen guru, Shrikanta, he used to say, if I'm not here to do it, then somebody else will do it. If Krishna doesn't use me, he'll use somebody else. And that's not to say that if I don't show up for my service, somebody else will show up. What he meant was, just as easily as Krishna gave me this opportunity, he can revoke that energy and give it to someone else. This is all just manifestation of Krishna's qualities, right? What do we actually have in quantity? Nothing. He's the ability in man. So all of that ability, everything we have is a manifestation of Krishna's energy, sparks of his splendor. And just as easily as he's given us that spark, he can give it to somebody else. So the easiest answer is sometimes we'll get so caught up in our minds that really what we want to do is our service. If we can do our service and constantly pray to Balaram, we can pray to Krishna and say, you know what, I know that you are taking care of the ego side of things. You'll keep my heart the way it's supposed to be. All I can do is my devotional service. And that's where it comes into, we get to perform our actions and not be attached to the results. It's also very difficult, but you know, Balaram finds a way to help us with those, kind of yanks away all of the things that are unnecessary. Did that answer the question?
It did. Thank you so much, Acyuta Gopi. I hope one day you'll give a series of classes on prayer. I'm hoping for that. So maybe one day.
Okay. That's a good idea. I'll write it down. Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you so much, Acyuta Gopi. Thank you everyone for your participation. My question. Have a great Ekadashi.